Long before kings carved laws into stone or scribes pressed reeds into clay, there was a silence over the land that would one day be called Sumer. Then the rivers came. The Tigris and Euphrates flooded, carving lines through the dust. And from that rhythm of destruction and renewal, humanity found its first order. The Sumerians said it was not by chance. They spoke of beings who descended from the stars, or perhaps from the higher heavens, to bring structure to chaos. They called them the Anunnaki. Their names were whispered with awe and fear, carved into tablets that outlived the empires built to honor them. According to the oldest myths, these weren't distant gods of vague abstraction. They were administrators of the cosmos, divine engineers who measured the weight of the world, the flow of the rivers, and even the number of grains in a basket. The Anunnaki, it was said, built civilization itself, not with miracles, but with laws, duties, and the cold mathematics of creation. Some texts describe them as the offspring of the sky god An and the earth goddess Ki, their name literally meaning those of royal blood. Others speak of them as a council 50 or morich, charged with maintaining balance across heaven, earth, and the underworld. They were neither good nor evil. They were order embodied, and humanity, in their eyes, was a useful tool to keep that order alive. Yet behind that structure lies an ancient unease, one that lingers like the shadow of a sandstorm. Did the Sumerians truly believe their gods descended to teach them? Or were they encoding memories of rulers, visitors, or forces they could barely comprehend into myth? Some researchers suggest the stories of the Anunnaki were metaphors for the city-states themselves, each god representing an aspect of governance, agriculture, or law. Others, more daring, claim there were memories of real beings, those who came from beyond the sky. Whatever truth lies buried beneath those tablets, the mystery remains. Why did the world's first civilization choose to explain its origins through beings that looked like them but were not of them? Sit back, relax, and as we trace their story from the floodplains of Sumer to the sands of forgotten ziggurats, remember this: every civilization begins with a story about where it came from. The question is, who told it first? In the heart of the southern plain, where river water met desert wind, stood a city that the ancients called Eridu, the place where heaven and earth first touched. To the Sumerians, Eridu was not just a settlement. It was the very beginning of everything human, the cradle where divine instruction took form. They believed that God Enki, Lord of wisdom and fresh waters, founded it himself. His temple, the Iabzu, was said to rest upon the primeval Setha Abzu where all life began. There, beneath its dark waters, Enki shaped order from chaos, measuring boundaries, assigning duties to gods and men alike. Around his sanctuary rose the first ziggurat, a stairway between worlds, built from mud and faith. Each brick carried meaning. Each level symbolized the space between earth and the heavens above. The people came to Eridu, not for conquest or trade, but to learn the rules of creation. The air was thick with incense, the sound of priests chanting the first hymns to gods whose faces none could see. According to the oldest tablets, 10 kings ruled in Eridu before the Great Flood, each said to have reigned for thousands of years. These rulers were not entirely mortal. They were intermediaries' descendants, perhaps, of the Anunnaki themselves, whose wisdom guided the fragile order between divine law and human ambition. Some modern scholars interpret these long-reigning kings as symbols of dynastic memory, the merging of myth and lineage. Yet others wonder, what if those impossible reigns recorded something real, something lost to time? The flood myths that followed of gods deciding humanity had grown too noisy, too rebellious begin here. In Eridu, the lines between divine and human blurred, and civilization became a reflection of both. The canals shimmered beneath the sun like silver threads weaving the pattern of destiny. Fishers, builders, and priests all served under Enki's gaze, maintaining the sacred balance between abundance and ruin. It's said that when Eridu finally fell silent, its temple sinking into silt and shadow, the gods had already moved on up the river, to Uruk, to Nippur, to Babylon, taking their divine order with them. What remained were the echoes of chants, the outlines of stairways leading nowhere, and the memory of a city where gods once walked among men. And as we move forward, from Eridu's lost stones to the flood that erased it, one question lingers like dust on the horizon. If the gods truly built the first city, what made them abandon it? The flood came not as a sudden storm, but as a whisper that grew into thunder. The Sumerians said it was the will of the gods, a divine decision made in the council of the Anunnaki. Humanity, once created to carry the burdens of the divine, had become too loud, too restless. Their noise rose to the heavens, disturbing the sleep of Enlil, the great lord of wind and authority. It was he who called for silence for a cleansing. The waters of the Abzu would rise, drowning the clamor of men. Yet among the gods, not all agreed. Enki, the guardian of wisdom and the friend of humanity, could not bear to see his creation perish. In secret, he whispered through a reed wall to a man named Ziusudra King, a priest, a mortal chosen to remember. "Tear down your house and build a boat," Enki said. "Abandon possessions, save life." So Ziusudra built his vessel, sealing it with pitch and prayer, filling it with the seed of every living thing. Then the skies opened. The rivers rose from below, and the heavens poured from above, swallowing the cities of Sumer one by one. Eridu disappeared first, then Batabira, then Larak, Sippar, and finally Shuruppak. For 7 days and 7 nights, the flood raged without mercy. The wind screamed over the water, carrying the cries of those who defied it. When silence returned, Ziusudra opened a window. The light broke through the clouds, and he saw that the world was emptier, vast mirror of mud and memory. He released a bird. It did not return. He released another, and it brought back a twig. The flood had ended. When the boat came to rest on a distant mountain, Ziusudra built an altar and offered sacrifice. The scent rose to the heavens, and the gods gathered like flies, hungry for the smoke of life once more. Enlil, furious that a mortal had survived, demanded an answer, but Enki's wisdom prevailed. "If we destroy them all, who will praise us? Who will build our temples?" he said. And so humanity was restored, smaller, quieter, more obedient. The gods retreated into heaven, their wrath washed clean by the tide. Yet every generation since has remembered the flood not as punishment, but as warning. For when order breaks and the noise of men rises again, who can say whether the gods still listen or if the waters wait in silence, ready to return? When the flood waters receded and the mud of the plains hardened beneath the sun, humanity began, again but not as before. The Sumerians said that kingship, once belonging to the gods, was lowered from heaven to earth. It did not rise from the people. It descended like a divine weight, a command that civilization must once again take form. The first cities to emerge from the flood's ruin were not built in defiance, but in obedience. Each temple, each wall, each canal carried the echo of divine instruction. The Anunnaki had established order, And now that order required guardians, Mings, chosen not only to rule but to maintain the fragile balance between man and God. These early rulers were seen as mediators of cosmic law. They built ziggurats as bridges between heaven and earth, ensuring that the divine realm and the mortal world remained intertwined. The city of Kish was said to have received the first kingship after the flood, followed by Uruk and Yor. In their reigns, the Sumerians saw not politics but cosmology in motion. A good king brought balance and prosperity. A corrupt one invited chaos and divine wrath. Tablets inscribed with hymns and decrees speak of kings as shepherds, a symbol both humble and commanding. They tended their people as flocks, but behind their rule was the invisible hand of the Anunnaki. Even the laws they wrote, rules governing trade, punishment, and inheritance, were considered extensions of divine will. In the temple courts, priests read omens in oil, smoke, and stars, ensuring every decision mirrored celestial harmony. Yet beneath this structure lingered unease. For if kingship came from the gods, then so did tyranny. The power that flowed from the heavens could as easily destroy as it could sustain. Some myths whisper that the gods themselves argued over who should rule the earth, mirroring the rivalries of mortal kings. Enlil, Enki, Inannoich demanded loyalty. Each city claimed divine favor. Civilization flourished, but it also fractured. Rival temples waged wars in the names of gods who may never have intended them. Still, the people built higher, wrote deeper, and prayed louder, as if afraid of being forgotten again. And in every coronation ritual, as the crown touched the king's brow, there was a silent acknowledgement. Power did not belong to men, it was only borrowed, and one day it would be taken back. Uruk rose like a vision from the dust, a city of baked brick and shimmering temples, where humanity first learned what it meant to be vast. It was here that the legend of Gilgamesh was born, the king who was 2/3 divine and 1/3 mortal, the ruler who would defy the limits set by the gods themselves. The walls of Uruk, massive and enduring, became symbols of human ambition reaching toward eternity. Within its gates, the world changed forever. Writing emerged, etched into clay in the script we now call cuneiform. With it came memory, law, record, and myth, no longer whispered by firelight, but fixed, immortal, unyielding. The Sumerians claimed that language itself was a gift from Enki, god of wisdom and water, allowing mankind to speak not just to each other but to the heavens. In Uruk's heart stood the temple of Inanna, goddess of love and war, her priests and priestesses performing rituals that blurred the line between devotion and desire. Life and death, creation and destruction, every act was sacred, every breath an echo of divine intention. Yet beneath this brilliance lay restlessness. The same spirit that built Uruk also rebelled against its gods. Gilgamesh, in his search for immortality, became the voice of all mankind, driven, flawed, magnificent, and doomed. He ruled with arrogance until the gods sent Enkidu, the wild man, to humble him. Their friendship became the axis of the epic, civilization meeting nature, restraint meeting chaos. Together, they defied divine order, slaying the bull of heaven, challenging the decrees that bound mortals to death. But when Enkidu fell, struck down by divine punishment, Gilgamesh learned the truth that no wall could contain and no temple could silence, that the gift of life was inseparable from its ending. His journey beyond the rivers of death, his encounter with Utnapishtim, the immortal survivor of the flood, was not a victory but an awakening. Even immortality, he learned, is a burden. The gods had set boundaries for a reason, and to cross them was to invite despair. When Gilgamesh returned to Uruk, he did not bring eternal life, but understanding. He looked upon his city's walls and realized that legacy, not life, was the only immortality mortals could claim. And so, as centuries passed, Uruk stood not just as a city, but as a question carved in stone. How far will humanity go to challenge the heavens that made it? As the ages turned and the dust of Uruk settled into the bones of time, the Anunnaki began to change in the stories that survived them. Once they were distant forces, celestial architects who shaped the rivers and breathed life into the fields. But in later tales, they descended walking among men, wearing crowns, sitting on thrones, and ruling the world as divine kings. The Sumerians did not separate their gods from their rulers. They believed the divine and the mortal were threads of the same fabric, woven together in cycles of power and decay. In temples like Ina and Eridu, the priests recited hymns to Nana, the moon god, who measured time with his silver light, and to Utu, the sun god, whose justice illuminated every corner of the land. Their rituals were precise, mathematical, designed to keep balance between heaven and earth. But over time, as power concentrated in palaces, the boundaries blurred. Kings began to call themselves chosen of Onu, or shepherds of the people. And some, like Naram-Sin of Akkad, went further, proclaiming themselves gods outright. Statues of these rulers show eyes wide with divine fire, gazers that seem to see beyond life itself. They built ziggurats that pierced the skyline, stairways of baked clay meant to bridge the realms of heaven and earth. The people climbed these steps not just to worship, but to be seen to exist within the gaze of their gods. Each offering, each sacrifice, was a conversation with eternity. And yet, the more human the gods became, the more fragile they seemed, their stories filled with jealousy, deceit, and vengeance. Enlil grew wrathful and unpredictable. Inanna's love turned to fury. Enki's wisdom was clouded by trickery. The line between divinity and humanity became not a wall, but a mirror. The Anunnaki, once perfect, began to resemble their creation flawed, ambitious, longing for control. And the kings who claimed their bloodline inherited that same curse. Empires rose and fell beneath the weight of divine entitlement. The more they reached toward godhood, the faster they crumbled into dust. But still, the memory endured that once the gods had walked among men, and deep beneath the ruins, buried in clay tablets and forgotten altars, humanity left a question for the ages. If the divine once ruled the earth, did they ever truly leave, or did they simply become us? Long before the flood myths of the Bible or the tales of Noah's Ark, the Sumerians told of a cataclysm that reshaped the world, the Great Deluge, when the Anunnaki, in their fury or despair, sought to cleanse the earth of mankind's noise. The tablets speak of a time when the gods themselves grew weary of human clamor. The constant prayers, the endless demands for favor and protection. Enlil, the storm god, was said to be the most angered. He saw humanity as an infestation, multiplying beyond control, corrupting the order he and the other Anunnaki had established. In secret, he called upon the divine assembly and decreed that the flood would come. The skies would darken, the rivers would rise, and the land would be washed clean of life. But not all the gods agreed. Enki, the lord of wisdom and water, defied the decree. He saw in humanity not a burden, but a reflection, curious, flawed, yet capable of creation. So, he whispered a warning to a man named Zevusudra, a righteous ruler of Shurappak. In dreams and omens, Enki instructed him to build a vast vessel, sealed with pitch, wide enough to hold his family, animals, and the seeds of all living things. And when the storm came, it came with a violence the world had never seen. The winds screamed for 7 days and nights, tearing temples apart, drowning cities beneath the waves. Even the gods trembled as lightning split the heavens and the oceans devoured the earth. The Anunnaki, once proud, now cowered at the destruction they had unleashed. In the Epic of Atrahasis, it is said that the goddess Ninto wept as she watched humanity perish, lamenting that her children had been destroyed. When the waters finally receded, Ziusudra emerged upon the mountain and released a dove into the silent sky. He offered sacrifice, and the scent reached the heavens. The gods gathered around, drawn by the aroma, humbled by the sight of survival. Enlil's anger turned to shame, and he swore never again to destroy mankind so completely. The flood, they decided, would not end humanity, it would begin a new covenant. The survivors were blessed, their kingship restored, and the balance between heaven and earth renewed. Yet the memory of that storm lingered, passed down through ages, reshaped in Babylon, echoed in Genesis. The question it left behind was the same. If even gods can regret, then who truly commands the fate of the world? In the heart of Mesopotamian myth lies one of its most enigmatic relics, the Tablets of Destiny, said to hold the power to govern the universe itself. They were not mere writings or records, but cosmic contracts, inscribed with the decrees of fate, the laws that bound gods and mortals alike. To possess them was to command the heavens, to dictate the winds, the rains, and the rise and fall of kings. The tablets were said to reside in the divine realm, guarded by Enlil, the Lord of Storms, whose authority depended on their possession. Yet even the gods were not immune to envy and rebellion. In one tale, the monstrous bird god Anzu, a creature born from the chaotic storms of the mountains, stole the tablets of destiny from Enlil's sanctuary. With them, he claimed dominion over the skies, unbalancing the order of the cosmos. The winds fell silent, the rivers stopped their flow, and the divine hierarchy crumbled. The Anunnaki were thrown into turmoil, for without the tablets, their authority was meaningless. The universe itself had no law. It was Ninurta, the warrior son of Enlil, who rose to restore the balance. Armed with the weapons of the gods, he ascended to the mountains where Anzu hid, cloaked in lightning and thunder. Their battle shook the heavens, and when Ninurta finally struck down the thief, he reclaimed the tablets of destiny and returned them to their rightful place. Order was restored, and the cosmic rhythm resumed its pulse. But beneath the triumph lingered unease. The story revealed a truth that the Sumerians never forgot, that even the divine order could be stolen. That power was never absolute, and that fate itself could be rewritten by those bold enough to seize it. The priests who copied these stories onto clay understood that the tablets were more than myth. They were a metaphor for knowledge, for the fragile balance between control and chaos. To write, to inscribe, was to claim a sliver of that divine power to shape reality through symbols. And perhaps that is why they wrote at all. Every wedge pressed into clay, every sign carved into stone, was an act of creation echoing the gods themselves. The question left in the silence of their temples was haunting. If mankind learned to write its own fate, did it also inherit the power to destroy it? When the floodwaters receded and the gods retreated to their distant thrones, the world below was left quiet and bare. But out of that silence rose something new, something that would define humanity for millennia: kingship. The Sumerians believed that kingship did not arise from human ambition, but was sent down from heaven. A divine institution meant to restore order after the chaos of the flood. The earliest tablets proclaim, then kingship descended from heaven, and Eridu became the seat of power. It was not simply a form of rule, it was a sacred trust, a connection between man and God, maintained through ritual, obedience, and blood. The king was not a god, but he walked dangerously close to one. He was the mediator, the shepherd, the vessel of the divine will, and his failure could doom an entire city. The city-states of Sumer, Lagash, Kish, and Uruk rose as living symbols of this new divine hierarchy. Each was ruled by a Lugal, a great man, whose authority came not just from military might but from favor of the gods. Every temple, every wall, every canal was built as an offering, a reflection of celestial design on earth. The king's duties were endless: to maintain justice, to perform sacrifices, to interpret omens, to ensure that the rhythm between heaven and earth remained unbroken. Without his devotion, famine would strike, floods would return, and the gods would turn their faces away. But kingship, like divinity, was never pure. The same power that bound heaven to earth also invited corruption. Kings began to expand their rule, conquering neighboring cities in the name of divine right. The wars of the gods became wars of men. Inscriptions from ancient Lagash tell of rulers boasting of victories granted by Ninjasu or Enlil, their enemies cursed and their spoils dedicated to the temples. Yet beneath every triumph, the people whispered the same question: were these kings chosen by the gods, or had they simply learned to wear their names? The rituals continued, the offerings burned, but the divine glow that once surrounded kingship began to flicker. In time, as empires rose and fell, the idea that heaven had handed down power remained, but its meaning grew hollow. And in that void, mankind discovered a dangerous truth: that once you believe power comes from the gods, you can justify anything done in their name. As the first cities of Sumer glimmered under the desert stars, the priests who climbed their ziggurats began to notice something profound. The heavens were not chaos, but order. Night after night, they charted the movement of celestial lights that seemed to follow invisible paths, crossing the same points again and again as if bound by divine law. These watchers of the sky became the earliest astronomers, though to them science and religion were one and the same. They believed the gods communicated through the stars, their will written in the constellations. Anu, the Sky Father, ruled the highest heavens, his domain divided into precise regions mapped by generations of temple scribes. Below him moved the wandering stars, the planets each tied to a deity. Nana, the moon, calm and rhythmic. Utu, the sun, radiant and just. Ishtar, bright and untamed. Nergal, fierce and red like war itself. The Sumerians watched these lights not merely for wonder, but for survival. When a planet shifted its path or a comet appeared, it was no accident, it was a message. The gods were speaking, warning of famine, war, or divine favor. Every flicker in the night sky was studied, recorded, interpreted, and woven into the rhythm of human life. From this devotion to observation came the world's first calendars, dividing time into cycles of the moon, predicting floods and harvests, aligning rituals with celestial moments of power. But in their search for order, they also found fear. The heavens, though predictable, were vast, silent, and indifferent. If the stars were the eyes of the gods, then humanity lived forever under their gaze, judged, measured, and never unseen. The ziggurats themselves, those massive stairways of clay and faith, became instruments of communion. From their summits, priests offered incense to the constellations, hoping to draw down blessings from the divine. Yet among the common people, whispers spread that some of those lights were not gods, but watchers beings who once descended to teach humankind forbidden knowledge, how to forge metal, how to read the sky, how to summon fire. Were they, the Anunnaki themselves, still overseeing their creation from above, or something else entirely? The stars held their silence, and so the Sumerians continued to look upward, wondering if what they saw in the night was destiny, or surveillance from the heavens. Beneath the shimmering surface of the Tigris and Euphrates, in the watery deep known as the Abzu, dwelled one of the most complex and paradoxical gods of Enki, lord of wisdom, magic, and creation. Unlike the stern and vengeful Enki was cunning, kind, and unpredictable. A deity whose laughter echoed through rivers and whose knowledge touched everything from birth to language to the shaping of civilization itself. The Sumerians believed that Enki held the sacred me, the divine decrees that governed all aspects of existence: kingship, truth, craftsmanship, love, and even rebellion. To possess the me was to understand how reality functioned, how the unseen laws of the cosmos could be bent or obeyed. Enki guarded them within his watery domain, but he was known to share them sometimes freely, sometimes through trickery. One story tells of how Inanna, the bold goddess of love and war, sought to make her city, Uruk, the greatest of all. She journeyed to Enki's temple in Eretz, offering him wine and charm until, in his drunken joy, he gave her the me. When he awoke, furious at his own foolishness, he sent sea creatures to retrieve them, but Inanna escaped, her barge heavy with divine order, carrying civilization, a priver to her people. The myth was more than a tale of divine mischief. It symbolized the movement of knowledge from chaos to culture, from deep water to fertile land. Enki's wisdom was not confined to the gods. It was the spark that made humans more than animals. He taught them how to irrigate fields, shape clay, build cities, and heal the sick. But such gifts came at a cost. Knowledge was power, and power disrupted the fragile balance between heaven and earth. Enki's compassion often put him at odds with the other Anunnaki, saved humanity from destruction more than once, undermining Enlil's wrath with cleverness and care. To the Sumerians, Enki represented the duality within every act of creation. Wisdom could save, but it could also deceive. Truth could enlighten, but it could also unmake. His temples were filled with sacred water jars, the symbol of his element and his secret. Every ripple in the river was his voice, whispering that the divine gift of understanding was both a blessing and a burden. And perhaps, in his laughter, he already knew that one day, humankind would use that same knowledge to rival the gods themselves. Among all the gods of Sumer, none embodied contradiction more vividly than Inanna, the goddess of love and war, beauty and blood, creation and ruin. She was the morning star and the evening star, her light soft yet unyielding, her heart filled with both tenderness and vengeance. But her most haunting tale was not one of conquest or seduction. It was her descent into the underworld, a journey that mirrored the eternal cycle of life, death, and rebirth. The story begins with a whisper of defiance. Inanna, proud queen of heaven and earth, decided to visit her sister Ereshkigal, the goddess of the underworld, whose realm was shadow and silence. But no one entered that place uninvited and returned unchanged. Before leaving, Inanna instructed her servant Ninshuba to send help if she did not return after 3 days. Then she adorned herself in full regalia, crown jewels, robes, and weapon symbols of her power and divinity, and descended through the 7 gates of the great below. At each gate, the gatekeeper demanded she remove 1 item: her crown, her necklace, her ring, her garment. With each surrender, she was stripped of her glory, her identity, her strength. By the time she stood before Ereshkigal, she was naked, vulnerable, and mortal. The queen of the underworld cast her down and hung her corpse on a hook, lifeless and still. For 3 days and nights, the world above withered. Crops failed, love ceased, the music of life fell silent. Then, faithful Ninshuba followed Inanna's command and sought help from the gods. Enki, moved by compassion, created 2 tiny beings from the dirt beneath his fingernails, creatures without gender or hunger. He sent them into the underworld with the water and food of life. They found Ereshkigal moaning in agony, and when they comforted her, she granted them a gift. They asked for the body of Inanna. Sprinkled with the waters of life, Inanna arose. But her return was not without price. To leave the underworld, she had to send another in her place. When she found her husband, Dumuzi, sitting on her throne, celebrating her absence, she marked him for the underworld instead. Thus began the cycle of seasons, the descent of Dumuzi each year into darkness, his return with the spring. Inanna's tale was not just a myth of death and rebirth, it was a warning that even the divine must fall before they rise again, and that power, to endure, must first surrender to the silence below. Long before paper or parchment, before ink flowed through pens and stories were bound in books, there were the scribes of Sumer, the quiet architects of memory who pressed the thoughts of gods and kings into wet clay. In the heat of the southern plains, beneath the shadow of ziggurats and temple walls, these men of precision sat cross-legged, holding reed styluses like sacred instruments. Each mark they made was deliberate, a wedge of language shaped by centuries of devotion and discipline. They were not merely recorders of words, but translators of the divine, preserving the world in symbols that could outlive flesh and stone alike. To write, for them, was to commune with the gods, to capture a fragment of the eternal. The invention of cuneiform, the wedge-shaped script, transformed the Sumerian world. It began as simple accounting records of grain, herds, and tribute, but soon expanded into myths, hymns, laws, and prayers. The first stories ever told were not spoken to the wind but carved into permanence. The Epic of Gilgamesh, the Hymn to Inanna, the laws of Yawnemor were born from clay and fire. Each tablet was a heartbeat of civilization, each library a temple of memory. The scribes themselves were both revered and burdened. They belonged to the priestly class, educated from childhood, their hands trained to move with flawless rhythm. Errors were sins against truth, omissions, offenses against the divine order, and yet they were also witnesses to the frailty of power. They recorded victories and defeats, births and burials, promises made by kings who would one day turn to dust. Through their hands passed decrees of conquest and mercy alike, for clay had no conscience, it remembered everything. The tablets they created were baked in kilns or hardened by time, enduring floods, wars, and centuries of silence. When the temples fell and cities crumbled, it was these fragments of clay that survived, whispering across millennia the thoughts of a vanished world. In their survival lies irony, while gods faded into myth and empires sank beneath sand. The words of mortal scribes became eternal. Every wedge, every stroke, was a defiance of forgetting, a declaration that humanity, once taught by the Anunnaki to write, had mastered the art of immortality. And as archaeologists uncovered these tablets thousands of years later, the voices of the ancient scribes spoke again. Their message unchanged: memory is the only true God, and writing is the only way to touch eternity. Rising above the flat Mesopotamian plains, the ziggurat stood like a mountain built by mortal hands, a bridge between heaven and earth, where the divine could descend and humanity could reach upward in reverence. Unlike the pyramids of Egypt, these were not tombs, but living temples, sacred stairways that touched the sky. Each one was a layered monument of clay and faith, its steps leading not to a grave, but to a god. The people of Sumer called them Anunnaki, the house of the foundation of heaven and earth. Their structure was both spiritual and scientific, perfectly aligned with the stars, their corners facing the cardinal directions, their base wide as a fortress and their summit crowned with a shrine. From below, the ziggurat shimmered in the sunlight, its mud brick walls coated with glazed tiles of blue and gold, reflecting the divine light of the heavens. To climb it was to move through worlds, the earthly, the celestial, and the divine. Priests ascended its stairs in solemn processions, carrying offerings, incense, and hymns. The air atop the ziggurat was said to hum with sacred energy, as if the gods themselves lingered in the wind. At dawn, the first rays of Utu, the sun god, would strike its summit. At night, the moon of Nana hung above it like an unblinking eye. The most famous of these towers stood in Babylon, dedicated to Marduk, heir of the ancient Anunnaki. Its presence was so awe-inspiring that later generations called it the Tower of Babel, the place where humanity sought to touch the sky and was scattered for its arrogance. But in Sumer, the ziggurat was not rebellion, it was harmony, a meeting point between the divine and the mortal, a declaration that the heavens and the earth were not enemies but reflections of each other. Every brick, every stair, was part of a cosmic equation, mirroring the celestial order mapped by the priests. Yet over time, as floods came and empires fell, the ziggurats eroded, their bricks dissolving back into the clay from which they were formed. Still, the image of the stairway endured, embedded in myth and memory, the dream of ascent, of communion, of touching something higher. And so the ziggurat became more than architecture. It became an idea, a symbol of mankind's eternal longing to rise, to understand, and to stand once again among the gods who first walked the earth in the beginning. Before kings and cities, before writing and worship, the world was silent and the gods were weary. The Anunnaki who had shaped the mountains, tamed the rivers, and ordered the stars, found themselves burdened with labor. They dug the canals, built the temples, and maintained the rhythm of existence, but even divine hands could grow tired. The younger gods complained to Enlil, their voices echoing through the heavens. Why must we toil endlessly? They asked. Why must we bear the weight of creation alone? Their cries reached Enki, the god of wisdom, who saw a solution that would change the cosmos forever. Let us fashion a being, he said, one who will serve, cultivate, and sustain the world we have made. And so, in the dark waters of the Abzu, Enki gathered the essence of Cletha, dust of the earth mixed with the breath of the divine. But to animate it, he needed more than matter. He needed spirit. The gods captured a rebel deity, one who had defied the order of heaven, and from his blood they drew the spark of life. Mixed with clay and song, it became flesh, the first human, born of both earth and rebellion. The goddess Ninhursag molded the form, shaping hands to work, eyes to see, and a heart to remember. When she breathed upon it, the figure opened its eyes, and the gods watched as it rose, trembling, into the light. Humanity was created not as a child of the gods, but as their servant, destined to bear the burdens they no longer wished to carry. They taught the first people to till the soil, to build canals, to offer sacrifices in gratitude. Smoke rose from the temples as humans prayed to those who had shaped them, unaware that they were fulfilling the very labor the gods had abandoned. Yet within this act of servitude, something unexpected emerged, the spark of independence, a will that even the Anunnaki could not control. Humanity began to create not only for the gods but for itself, crafting tools, stories, and dreams. Enki watched with secret pride, knowing that in giving life, he had also given freedom, and so the balance shifted. The gods who had created man to serve them unknowingly created their own reflection beings, capable of rebellion, love, and ambition. The clay that once lay silent now spoke, questioned, and imagined. The servants had become creators, and in their creation lay both wonder and danger. For what the gods had given could never again be taken back, as the generations of men multiplied and spread across the plains of Mesopotamia. They no longer lived as wandering servants of the gods, but as builders of order amid the chaos of nature. The rivers Tigris and Euphrates became lifelines, and along their fertile banks the first cities began to rise like mirrors of the heavens. Eridu was the first city said to have been founded by Enki himself, where temples shimmered in the sun and priests carried out rituals to maintain harmony between gods and men. From there came Uruk, the city of Gilgamesh, whose towering walls declared humanity's defiance against the floods and beasts that once ruled the land. The people learned to make bricks from clay and fire, stacking them into ziggurats that climbed toward the sky, each level a step closer to the divine. Within those sacred heights, kings declared themselves chosen by the gods, intermediaries between the mortal and celestial realms. But as the cities grew, so did their hunger for power, for land, for eternal remembrance. Temples became treasuries, and priests became gatekeepers of knowledge, hoarding the secrets of writing and number. The first scribes carved cuneiform tablets, recording the names of kings, the weights of grain, the debts of merchants, and the laws that bound the people. Civilization had been born, but with it came hierarchy and ambition. The simple servitude of early humanity was gone. Now men sought dominion, not only over earth, but over each other. The rivers that once blessed them also brought destruction when they flooded, washing away crops and cities alike, reminders that nature remained the stronger god. Yet the people did not despair. They rebuilt again and again, as if defiance was their truest form of worship. In the marketplaces of Uruk, voices rose like the hum of creation itself. Traders bartering, silver for barley, artisans shaping idols, poets reciting hymns to Inanna, the goddess of love and war. Beneath it all flowed a pulse that even the gods could feel, the rhythm of civilization, the heartbeat of mankind refusing to fade. The cities became living beings, breathing, growing, decaying, and reborn. Humanity had learned to control its world, but in doing so, it also chained itself to its own creations. From the first city walls to the smoke of temple fires, a new kind of worship had begun, the worship of power, permanence, and the unyielding will to endure. As cities swelled and thrones emerged from the dust, a new kind of order began to take shape, one forged not merely in stone, but in divine promise. The kings of Mesopotamia claimed more than authority. They claimed lineage, tracing their bloodlines back to the Anunnaki themselves. To rule was not just to govern, it was to uphold a sacred covenant between heaven and earth. In the clay tablets of Sumer, the earliest kings are called shepherds, chosen by the gods to guide mankind as Enlil once commanded the winds. But behind this poetic veneer lay a dangerous pact. The gods granted dominion, but demanded obedience, offerings, and sacrifice. The king became the mediator, the mouth through which divine will spoke. His victories in war were not his own, they were decreed by the stars, foretold by omens, and justified through ritual. When he failed, when famine struck, or rivers turned red with clay, the people did not blame misfortune, they saw divine displeasure. Thus, kingship was both gift and curse, glory and burden. Temples were raised in their honor, but their thrones were always shadowed by the weight of expectation. To keep order, they built ziggurats, massive stairways, linking the mortal world to the heavens, symbols of mankind's eternal yearning for connection. Each brick bore the names of rulers who prayed that their legacy would outlast their mortal form. In those days, to build was to beg for immortality. Yet, in the darkness of night, even the mightiest king must have wondered whether the gods watched kindly or merely tolerated his defiance. In the sacred texts, one finds constant reminders. When man forgets humility, the gods remind him of dust. When man claims heaven as his right, storms rise to wash him away. But even the gods could not escape the entanglement they created. As human devotion deepened, the divine grew dependent on belief, sustained by the endless cycle of prayer and offering. The covenant, once a symbol of divine grace, became a tether binding both worlds together. The king was no longer just a ruler. He was a vessel of cosmic balance, a fragile bridge between creation and collapse. Each dawn, when the temple bells rang and incense curled toward the sky, the same question lingered in the smoke. Did man serve the gods, or had the gods begun to serve man? Towering over the horizon like mountains made by mortal hands, the ziggurats of Mesopotamia stood as both monuments and mysteries. They were not mere temples, but cosmic engines, each layer representing a step between the earth and the heavens. From a distance, they looked eternal, their mud-brick faces glowing gold under the setting sun. But up close, they breathed with life the echo of chants, the hum of priests, the clatter of offerings, carried up winding staircases toward the summit where gods were said to descend. The ziggurat of yore, dedicated to Nana, the moon god, rose so high that some claimed you could feel the pulse of the stars from its peak. Others whispered that deep within its foundation were chambers built for rituals that no mortal was meant to see. The air around them shimmered with a quiet charge, as though the very earth vibrated with sacred frequency. Scholars believe these structures were designed as celestial observatories, aligning with constellations that marked the passing of seasons and the destinies of kings. Yet others argue they were communication towers, not of stone alone, but of energy, a bridge through which the Anunnaki maintained their connection to the world they had shaped. At the top, offerings of incense, fruit, and lambs were made, smoke rising like coded messages into the ether. The priests performed their duties with precision, each movement synchronized with chants written in a language older than empire itself. The ziggurat was not just architecture, it was a statement, a claim that humanity could touch the divine if only it reached high enough. But this ambition came with danger. Legends speak of men who entered forbidden chambers and were never seen again, of scribes who transcribed the hymns of gods and went mad from what they heard. Even the kings approached these towers with reverence, for they understood that what stood before them was more than a symbol, it was a reminder. The higher man built, the closer he came to the line between reverence and rebellion. And as each generation raised the stones higher, a question echoed through time. Were they building temples to honor their creators or to replace them? The ziggurats reached toward heaven, but somewhere in their shadow, the ground began to tremble as civilization advanced and the ziggurats reached ever higher. So too did mankind's hunger for knowledge grow. Among the clay tablets unearthed from the sands of time, one thing stands out, a script so complex, so deliberate, it was said to have been gifted by the gods themselves. This was cuneiform, the language of wedges pressed into soft clay, hardened by fire and sealed by time. To the untrained eye, it was nothing more than clusters of tiny marks. But to those who could read it, it was power pure and unending. It was the voice of the Anunnaki, the echo of divine communication made tangible. Some tablets spoke of trade, of barley and silver, of debts and contracts. But others whispered secrets: the creation of man, the descent of kingship from the heavens, and the laws that governed both mortal and divine realms. The scribes who mastered this language were not mere writers. They were conduits, chosen to interpret messages from realms beyond comprehension. Their training was rigorous, their duty sacred. Each symbol carried weight, and each phrase was crafted with care, for a single mistake could twist meaning and bring wrath upon the one who wrote it. Some believed that the sound of these words, when spoken aloud, could summon the attention of the gods themselves, and so they were rarely uttered outside the temples. The tablets became the memory of civilization, a network of thought that transcended generations. Yet, beneath their order, a strange pattern began to emerge. Stories told, not as myth, but as record. Dates and places aligned with precision, suggesting that the divine events once inscribed may have been moments of history, not imagination. Could it be that the Anunnaki left behind not just their image, but their syntax, a code embedded within human language? Some researchers argue that linguistic roots found across continents echo the phonetics of ancient Sumerian, as if humanity still carries fragments of the first tongue in its DNA. Others dismiss this as coincidence, a product of man's endless desire to trace his origins to the stars. But the question remains, if language was the bridge between gods and men, then who truly spoke first? Did humanity learn to write to praise its creators? Did the gods teach men to write so they could be remembered long after they were gone? Long before telescopes and maps of the heavens, the ancient Sumerians looked upward and saw not chaos, but design. To them, the stars were not distant suns, but divine messengers, X1, a spark of intelligence within the vast mind of the cosmos. The priests of Nippur, Uruk, and Urdu studied their movements with obsessive precision, charting alignments, eclipses, and the wandering of bright planets across the sky. They called these celestial bodies the Me, divine ordinances that governed fate and order. It was said that the Anunnaki taught mankind to read the heavens as one reads a book, for the stars were their writing each constellation, a chapter in the history of gods. The planet Nibiru, the so-called home of the Anunnaki, was said to move in an immense orbit, returning to Earth only after thousands of years. Some scholars argue that this myth encoded astronomical knowledge beyond the capability of early civilizations, that the Sumerians knew of a planet unseen, its return marked by upheaval and change. Others claim it was metaphor, a way to describe cycles of destruction and rebirth, divine judgment and renewal. But the records are hauntingly specific. The Epic of Enuma Elish speaks of celestial battles among gods, of Tiamat split by Marduk's storm, of stars scattered like fragments of her shattered body. To the priests, these were not metaphors, but cosmic events of war written in light across the night sky. They believed that the position of Jupiter foretold the rise of kings, and the shadow of an eclipse signaled the death of empires. The temples themselves were aligned with the heavens, their corners facing the cardinal directions, their summits pointed toward key stars. Each dawn's light fell upon altars at precise moments, marking solstices and equinoxes with godlike accuracy. Some researchers now suggest that such alignment required knowledge of geometry and astronomy centuries ahead of its time. Was this merely coincidence, or the lingering instruction of those who came before? The ancients claimed they were taught by watchers, beings of radiant countenance who descended from the sky and revealed the patterns of the cosmos. Whether gods or teachers, their legacy endures, carved into stone, encoded in myth, reflected in every night sky. The stars still whisper the same question they once posed to the priests of yore: are we the observers of heaven or its creation? There was a time, according to the tablets, when the world existed in perfect harmony between heaven and earth, a golden age when the Anunnaki walked openly among men, and the boundaries between divine and mortal were blurred. The rivers flowed sweet, crops grew in abundance, and sickness was unknown. The temples gleamed beneath the sun, their walls covered in gold leaf that reflected light like liquid fire. Music echoed through the streets of Uruk and Eridu, flutes and drums carrying hymns of gratitude for the divine rulers who had given men the gifts of civilization. This age, as told in the Sumerian king list, was one of impossible reign-kings who ruled for tens of thousands of years, their lifespans stretching beyond mortal comprehension. Some say these were symbolic, meant to express the idea of eternal order. Others whisper that these rulers were the Anunnaki themselves, beings whose blood was not like ours, whose presence distorted time. It was said that during this age, knowledge was shared freely. Mathematics, agriculture, medicine, even the calendar rule were taught by the gods as gifts, tools to bring order to a chaotic world. The people lived not in fear but in awe. Offerings were made in joy, not desperation, and the temples served as centers of both worship and learning. Yet even perfection carries within it the seed of decay. Pride began to bloom in the hearts of men, and division crept into the councils of the gods. Enlil demanded obedience, while Enki favored compassion. Their conflict mirrored that of creation itself: control versus freedom, law versus life. As men multiplied and cities expanded, the gods began to withdraw, step by step, retreating into the skies and mountains, leaving priests to interpret their silence. The golden light that once illuminated the ziggurats began to dim. The records speak of omen stars shifting out of place, storms without end, and rivers running red. The covenant was weakening, the balance slipping away. What had been a paradise turned restless, as though the very earth mourned the fading presence of its creators. Yet humanity, ever persistent, continued to build, to worship, to dream. They could not see that their age of wonder was ending. The gods had given them everything, and now, for reasons still lost to time, they began to take it back. The golden age could not last forever, for even the heavens grow weary of peace. The tablets tell of a time when the Anunnaki themselves turned against one another, when discord spread among the divine ranks like cracks in the foundation of creation. It began, as all great tragedies do, with envy. Some of the younger gods, burdened by endless toil on earth, grew restless under Enlil's command. They were tasked with maintaining the rivers, tending the fields, shaping the clay of humanity's destiny, and they began to resent the order imposed upon them. These were the Ajiji, the lesser gods, who labored endlessly while the higher deities dwelled in splendor. The myth says they rose up in defiance, surrounding Enlil's temple with torches blazing, their cries shaking the heavens. The great assembly was thrown into chaos. It was Enki, the trickster and the wise, who proposed a solution to end the rebellion. "Let us make a new being," he said, "one who shall bear the burden of labor so that the gods may rest." And so, from rebellion came creation. Humanity was forged in the fires of descent, born not from divine love, but from divine fatigue. Yet this rebellion left scars among the gods. Trust was shattered, alliances fractured, and the balance of the cosmos shifted forever. The Anunnaki, who sided with the Ajiji, were punished, cast down, or sent to distant realms. Some traditions say they descended into the earth, becoming the unseen spirits that linger in the shadows of human history. Others claim they were exiled to the heavens, their wandering orbits becoming the very planets we observe today. The rebellion marked the beginning of separation, the slow unraveling of unity that once held gods and men in harmony. In the wake of divine conflict, humanity inherited both the gift of creation and the curse of disobedience. The echoes of that ancient defiance still ripple through time, reflected in every act of human rebellion, every challenge to authority, every spark of independence that refuses to be subdued. For perhaps, in that long-forgotten revolt, mankind inherited more than purpose. We inherited the will of the gods themselves, the same restless fire that drives us to question, to rise, and to break the chains of heaven in the aftermath of rebellion, when divine tempers cooled and the heavens hung heavy with smoke. The Anunnaki turned their attention to a new creation, one that would bear the burden of labor and restore balance to a fractured cosmos. Enki, the god of wisdom and water, descended into the depths of the earth to shape the first man. With Ninhursag, the mother goddess, he gathered clay from the banks of the sacred rivers, mixing it with the essence of a slain god. From this union of earth and divinity, humanity was born fragile in form, yet carrying within it the spark of immortality. The first breath filled the man's lungs, and the gods watched in awe as the creature rose, blinking beneath the light of the sun. He was neither fully divine nor wholly mortal, but something in between, a bridge between heaven and earth. The early humans were simple beings, their minds unformed, their hands trembling as they tilled the soil and carried offerings to their creators. They worked in silence, unaware of their place in the grand design. But Enki, ever compassionate, looked upon them with pity. He whispered knowledge into their dreams, how to plant, how to harvest, how to build shelters and shape tools. Slowly, humanity learned. The gods watched their progress with a mix of pride and fear, for as mankind grew more capable, they began to question. Why must they serve? Why must they toil for beings they could no longer see? Enlil saw danger in this awakening. They grow too wise, he warned, too curious. Their hands reach upward, yet Enki defended them, saying that wisdom was their birthright, the very thing that made them worthy of existence. And so the gods argued, even as humanity multiplied. Villages grew into cities, songs were sung to the heavens, and the first temples rose like mountains of devotion. But with knowledge came consequence. Humans learned not only to create, but to destroy. They fought among themselves, built idols in their own image, and forgot the reverence of old. The gods had given them life, but in that gift lay the seed of defiance. For the clay that shaped man was soft, but the fire that burned within it was the same that once burned in the hearts of gods. As mankind thrived and the cities of Sumer began to hum with life, the gods watched from the heights of their temples, divided between pride and unease. Humanity had grown quickly, too quickly. The knowledge that had once been sacred, guarded by priests and celestial decrees, began to seep into mortal hands like water through stone. It was said that Enki, ever the friend of man, could not resist sharing secrets forbidden by the higher gods. He whispered to the first kings how to read the stars, how to summon rain, how to shape metal from stone and turn chaos into order. To some, he taught the language of healing and the mystery of childbirth. To others, the art of enchantment and architecture. Civilization blossomed, but with it came curiosity that bordered on rebellion. The more mankind learned, the more it sought. They built towers that reached for the sky, delved deep into the earth for hidden ores, and questioned the silent heavens that once thundered with divine presence. Enlil grew furious, accusing Enki of overstepping divine law. "You have made them as we are," he thundered, "and now they will no longer bow." The other gods murmured in unease, for they, too, saw the change. Humanity, once obedient and reverent, now moved with purpose independent of the divine. They no longer waited for the gods to command the floods, they built canals. They no longer begged for food, they learned to grow it themselves. The power of creation, once exclusive to the heavens, now flowed through mortal veins. But knowledge is a double-edged sword. With every discovery came imbalance, and with every act of creation came destruction. Wars broke out over resources, cities consumed one another in greed, and the air that once echoed with hymns now rang with the clash of ambition. Enki, filled with sorrow, knew the truth to lay the knowledge he had shared was both a blessing and a curse. The gods began to retreat, their temples falling silent as mankind filled the world with its own noise. Yet the memory of their teachers endured, passed down in myths and symbols carved into stone. Some say the gods did not leave, they merely changed form, embedding their essence within the very minds of those they once ruled. Others believe they vanished in anger, vowing to return when humanity had learned the price of forbidden wisdom.